Hello, and welcome to episode 140 of Prose. This week, join the Primrose 33 family as we dive back into the novella Sonbol, all 5 parts together in one place for the very first time. This is a pretty big deal for Prose, and it's a pretty big deal for listeners. Rather than the usual 20 to 45 minutes of episode, this goes over an hour. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy this first ever full novella in one sitting from the podcast. Again, this is Sonbol, a novella by me, Jared I. McGee, and I hope that you enjoy. Sonbol, Part 1. The Breach. Everyone had known the invasion was coming for years now. The Smock, as we called them, in the nearest utterance in English to their smacking vocalizations, had made contact with Earth 5 full years before they were due to arrive. In fact, that was one of the more unsettling things about them. They had announced their forthcoming arrival and their intentions of conquest in such a way as to allow us half a decade to prepare. That warning demonstrated confidence in their abilities to dominate and a major lack of confidence in humanity's ability to defend itself and its planet. That confidence was not misplaced either. We'd only just sent our first exploratory missions to Mars, and that was fraught with anger between the whopping 2 nations that had collaborated on the project. So, the chances of us combating or repelling the Smock seemed very slight indeed when that fateful message had first come in. That being said, humanity often surprises even itself. Within 3 weeks of contact, the UN had drafted a peace accord that all member nations agreed to sign. It was a unanimous adoption in the Security Council, and then again in the General Assembly. In another 3 weeks' time, the UN members had convinced the more solitary, lone-standing nations of the planet to sign on too. So, after just under 2 months, the Earth was poised to stand as one. On June 4th, 2051, the Dublin Accords were signed, and work began among the peoples of the world in preparation for our defense. 1 full year into preparation saw various world academies pop up for those that would be willing to serve in the upcoming battles. I quickly signed up. Not because I'm a natural athlete or lover of war or brave man or anything. Rather, I've always had a healthy dose of wanderlust, and this opportunity would take me to space. Space! I simply couldn't pass it up. Only the rich kids from university ever got to vacation out to the orbitals. In my estimation, this was the only way I'd ever break orbit in my lifetime. So, I pushed my terror of fighting and dying down pretty deep within myself, started forming some deluded narrative to convince myself this was my destiny, and was one of the first people in my entire state to sign up. Everyone in Staffen Ridge, Tennessee thought maybe I'd gone mad. Well, not everyone. Some thought I was looking to commit suicide by extraterrestrial. Neither was true, of course, unless thirsting for more in life is madness, which it very well could be. The Global Confederation, as it came to be called, placed the academies across the planet for equal access. The process for assignment, though, was based on test scores, skills, and physical achievements during the 2-week initial pre-boot camp. As it turned out, my not being a god on the fields or on the courts, the ice, the gym, wherever, did not preclude me from achieving in the GC program. The practice of taking an amalgamation of scores on a variety of subjects actually helped my score beyond measure. I got a 4 out of 5 on my athletics testing, which surprised me. I got several 2 out of 5 marks on things like mechanics, electrical, spatial reasoning, and higher order maths. However, I had some of the highest scores in the nation in linguistics, conflict resolution, critical thinking, abstract considerations, and a great many more subjects in that vein. Those were straight 5 out of 5s. Because my high scores mattered far more in the weighted averaging, I ended up becoming quite the desirable candidate. A great deal of superfluous detail aside, I pretty much got the privilege of picking which training academy I would attend. My wanderlust had long seen me traveling the world, but my heart had been left in Ireland when I was roughly 16. So I chose the rather important Dublin Academy. In truth, the facilities were just outside of Dublin, but this academy, often referred to as Academy Prime, or just Prime, was named for the city, its being the very first academy formed in the wake of the Dublin Accords. Moreover, since Greater Dublin had become the world's newest, most prolific technology hub in the late 2020s, having Academy Prime there made even more sense on top of the other reasons. Now, I, of course, didn't just choose Prime out of nostalgia for a bygone high school trip. No. This training facility produced leaders. There was no formal agreement that the officer corps would come heavily from Prime, but that's how things always shook out. Month after month, Prime churned out the leaders that would take command both in training exercise and in the coming battles ahead. By the time I made it across the Atlantic, almost 2 full years had passed since the Smock had reached out to Earth. That gave me just 3 years to become the best possible defender of humanity I could be. That was quite the motivator, at least in my eyes. Having grown up in a fairly conservative region of the States, I must admit that I was a bit taken aback when I showed up to my assigned room, number 33, in my assigned hall, Primrose Hall, and I was informed that my quad would be co-ed, 2 guys and 2 gals. This wasn't exactly uncommon at the smaller regional training facilities or the various academies, but the conservative bent that had been beaten into my psyche from a young age marveled at it nonetheless. I met all 3 of my roommates at the same time, as I was the last to check in with my handful of allowed belongings and my various uniform implements in hand. First, I shook the hand of a wiry older woman with raven black hair and shockingly cool blue eyes. From my estimation, she was around 5'2", 50 years old, and she was in amazing shape for any age. Barbara McCarthy, Navigator. I knew this because I'd done my homework. Like any good would-be leader, I'd gone over the dossiers of these people that I'd be sharing my working hours and future fighting hours with. That being said, I'd not realized we'd be living together too. Assignments were one thing, this was another. Co-ed bunks aside, that was a lot of time to be spent between the 4 of us. I realized that I'd been lost in thought and was staring blankly at McCarthy, still shaking her hand. I mumbled some platitude and moved on down the line. Next, I took in a man about my size, 5 foot 10 inches on a good day. Broad shoulders. A ready smile. Again, a bit older than me. He had already grayed heavily and was missing most of his hair on the crown of his head. He couldn't have been too much older than Barbara, though. He had apparently lived a bit harder than her. Even so, the strength in the man's arms were nothing I'd want to tangle with. Anton Fitzgerald, pilot and security specialist. Last, I was greeted by a pale goddess of a woman, her sea green eyes framed by velvety curls of brown. Her body was toned and tight, but not in the sleek, harsh way of Barbara's and not in the bulky, corded way of Anton's. Something else. She smiled widely, but wasn't quick to meet my gaze. She was shy then. Hyacinth Rose Flowers, engineer, master electrician, astrophysicist, and communications liaison, among other things. That she was gorgeous was enough to take me aback. That she'd apparently qualified in every testing subject save hand-to-hand combat was an added bit to knock me on my heels. And that name of hers? Wow. Hyacinth Rose Flowers. When she said it, her words carried the weight of many a laugh. Still, I couldn't help but snicker a bit, which brought her tucked chin up, and her eyes shot to meet mine, and our handshake intensified. Call me Hi. No, my parents didn't hate me. Yes, I'm amazing at botany and horticulture. Yes, I realize I'm living in Primrose Hall on top of it. Does that about cover it, Mr. McAllister? Well, all right then. She knew my name. It looks like she'd done her homework too. No, I'd given it to them already. Wow. It was quite the whirlwind of a day. I made some defensive gestures, apologized, and introduced myself formally in the manner we'd been asked to at orientation before leaving our respective regional facilities. Hi, I'm Jason McAllister, 32, trained at Tennessee Unit 514 in the USA. Top 3 rankings: linguistics, command procedure, and conflict resolution. The other 3 were clearly thrown off by my more formal, by-the-book introduction, and they quickly followed suit by responding in that vein despite the handshakes having already been shared around the room. Barbara McCarthy, 54, trained at Killarney Unit 616, top 3 rankings, navigation, fuel chemistry, and non-standard battle tactics. My eyes widened at that last specialty. I'd have never guessed. The woman was in shape and all, but non-standards? Yikes. Non-standards specialists were nothing to be trifled with. Anton Fitzgerald, 52, trained at Belfast Unit 223, top 3 rankings, infantry tactics, non-grav weaponry, and grav and non-grav pilotry. Anton was a jovial but dangerous man then. Additionally, the rigor he'd had to have gone through to even get into pilot's school, much less pass through with those specialties, was beyond imagining. Anton was a smart cookie and a cool cucumber under pressure on top of the rest. Hyacinth High Rose Flowers, 24, trained at Boston Unit 27C, ranked Omega. Holy shit. That hadn't been in her file. Dear God. Ranked Omega? That meant she could do anything, really. She would have had to rank out at everything. I stuttered, trying to find words to ask her questions to further explain this, when the intercom system came on. All newly arrived trainees, please report to mess for initial inspection and orientation to facilities, duties, and assignments. Repeat. All newly arrived trainees, please report to mess for initial inspection and orientation to facilities, duties, and assignments. My questions would have to wait then. Without thinking about it, I tossed my bags down on the nearest bunk that looked unclaimed, a rather easy thing to surmise, seeing as 3 of the 4 already had some creases in the sheets and bedrolls, and, for the first time, I realized that they were all in their deep green jumpsuits befitting someone attending Academy Prime. Shit. I was still wearing my brick red regionals. I stripped off as quickly as I could, jostling about and hopping into my own suit. McCarthy and Fitzgerald turned their backs, giving me a bit of privacy, which I appreciated even if we all would be seeing one another in far less than our skivvies in the very near future. Hyacinth rose flowers stood unmoving as I zipped my suit up, not exactly staring, but certainly making it known that she wouldn't adjust her world to suit mine. With my new suit on, and my new roommates and soon-to-be fighting companions in tow, we all ran down the hall together to see what the next 3 years of our lives would bring. Part 2. Persenche. Rather quickly, McCarthy, Fitzgerald, Flowers, and I came to fully realize just how closely we four would be working together. Essentially, at Academy Prime, the quads were divided by assignments. Now, we had an inkling this was so, but hearing it from the Commandant's lips directly nailed that home for all four of us, for everyone that had gathered in the mess for orientation, really. The Commandant herself lived with 3 other commanding officers that served with her, creating a super quad that would go into battle just like the rest of us 3 years down the road when the Smock entered our solar system, just outside of Mars being the current launching point for our growing fleet. My first day at Prime was, in all honesty, a bit blasé to start. We had meetings galore. We took tours galore. We split up according to specialties to have more in-depth looks at what we'd be doing for the global defense effort and how, precisely, we'd go about our assignments in the months and years before any action would be seen. But it was all theoretical. Classroom work. The awkward meeting with my 3 others that made up Primrose 33, the name, of course, coming from the name of our hall and our room number, real original, right? Had occurred at roughly 0800, quite literally directly after my arrival transfer took me from the airport in Dublin to the academy. The rest of these meetings and tours and other perfunctory day 1 type doings ran until 1800. 10 straight hours of this is the laundry room and don't do that thing we beat trained into you at your regional facility. In short, it was 10 hours of redundancy and repetition. On top of that, I didn't see my bunkmates and partners throughout all of it, all quads being split in favor of some other groupings. 1800 saw us eating some pretty nice food in the mess. Nice might be a bit of a stretch to most of the others at Prime, but I honestly thought it was some of the better food I'd had in some time. Regional facilities didn't have bad food, but they certainly didn't have sloppy joes with real beef. To me, our victuals were beyond reproach, but that might be the poor kid from Tennessee talking and not the up-and-coming would-be leader of a space-age mission against a probable alien armada. That disadvantaged Tennessean boy lurched when I turned down my picky tablemate's offer to finish their sandwiches. But this current Tennessean man that wanted to be the best of the best knew damn well that 4 more half-sloppy joes on top of my entire plate would not help him in becoming a leader in physical testing here at the academy. I had to change along with the rest of the world, even in these small ways, all because of these Smock. There really wasn't an aspect of life that those buggers hadn't touched with that proclamation of theirs. I had often found myself wondering if they somehow got off on the knowledge that they'd so skewed the course of our planet and the lives of its inhabitants. Those thoughts would creep in more and more often now that I was stationed in Dublin. The academy made this all far more real after all. Mess had begun at 1800, and mess promptly ended at 1900 with some harsh-sounding guttural instructions from one of the sergeants, and all diners scattering in all directions, half running to whatever had been listed as their next set of meetings on their wrist communicators, or RITCOMs, as we world military types lovingly referred to them. We were tasked with calling them this back at regionals. In truth, they were fancy smartwatches that had a couple extra features and no need for a secondary device. We'd come a long way with technology over the past 50 years, but we weren't so advanced as to be unrecognizable from a century before us. That would be the stuff of bad fiction. I let the hundreds of others rapidly disperse while I took an extra moment to check my communicator. Now, we were getting to the good stuff. There, right there on my wrist in a green-tinged off-white font read, Core-Specific Training. One of the cool features of the RITCOMs is that you can hard press down on a word or term or place or whatever and get more information about it. The feature was nothing new to any user of technology, but it still amazed me every time, as it meant I never had to feel utterly lost with all the new jargon that was springing up in the short time since the advent of the Global Confederation. I long pressed on Core, and the display flicked to a new set of text saying, Core, most basic unit of Global Confederation Defense Forces companies. For adhesion and cohesion, Core units share living assignments and mission orders from Global Command. Core groupings hold a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 8. Corps come together under commanding officers to form companies, battalions, and other larger units. Synonym for Corps, Quad. This unofficial term springs from the groupings of 4. Even Corps units of 8 are split into 2 for living arrangements for logistical purposes. Need more information? Press here. I decided that was more than enough information to let me know that I was correct about both how our living situation here at Prime had shaken out, and that after a pretty tedious day, we would be getting to do some initial training in our quads after all. I was stoked about this, since this would be the first time we'd mock up how we'd be serving and fighting together in our new mini-families. However, Flowers' scalding looks and refusal to look away from me as I changed made me think I had some bridge building to do there, particularly if we four wanted to have the kind of cohesion necessary to trust someone or a group of someones with your life. My meeting was to be held at the Camelopard, which was actually a building called Regent's Hall, but it was so spotted and modeled that it had become known by the archaic name for a giraffe. The nickname was clever, I thought. From reading my prep packet, I avoided the usual surprise that newly arrived trainees had when seeing how beat up and relatively old some of Prime's buildings were. In short, when you have to have academies like this spring up worldwide almost overnight, you have to take some pretty major shortcuts, using whatever buildings and materials are available to you. Our dear Camelopard was some old factory building that had been around for only God knows how long. It had been requisitioned immediately following the Accords. Not that too much convincing to turn it over for a decent price needed to be done, I'm sure. This building was another 10 years from crumbling into true disuse and actual legal condemnation, and that's being generous. For the GC, though, it was just another building in which to hold just another set of training courses. As I entered, the musty smell of mold and sheer oldness and disrepair struck me in the face, and I thanked the good Lord that our living quarters in Primrose were among those newer buildings that did pop up overnight after the Accords. What I assume what used to be a factory floor was open and sprawling, so it took me a little bit to wind through the tables and desks and other classroom-style furniture in an attempt to find my 3 assigned corps mates. After about 5 minutes of wandering, I saw McCarthy waving and beaming at me from another 15 feet away. Right up front. Nice. I was more of a second-row kid myself, close enough to let my instructors know that I'm serious about learning, but still not in suck-up central of row 1. But this would certainly do for me on our first little introductory day lesson, whatever it was. Prime was quite famous, or maybe for tossing its cadets into odd situations right off the bat. So I can't say that I wasn't surprised by all this traditional classroom setup mess. Everyone was sitting in little chairs and desks, scrawl pads out and ready to take notes. My surprise began to edge closer to anxiety as I took my seat, McCarthy and Fitzgerald greeting me warmly, Flowers giving me the barest of nods. Anxiousness was cropping up because, if I knew the GC and its way of doing things, this was all some sort of posturing to get us calm and in one mindset, while the real training was going to be something quite different indeed. I put my head on the swivel, trying to determine what could possibly be set to come at us from the expanses of this very open room. Hiding too terribly much would be difficult. Rather quickly, my crew realized my unease and began inquiring as to why I was so on edge and for what reason I was now scanning the room with my newly acquired military situation analysis eyes, if you will. My steely focus must have been a bit disconcerting in this environment. I explained my thoughts on the matter briefly. You know, he's right, ladies. This does seem a bit soft and squishy for core training session at Prime. Ears up and open, aye? Fitzgerald tossed out to the table. Aye. McCarthy replied immediately. Flowers simply looked from her to him to me, not nodding or uttering so much as an mm-hmm. Apparently, I'd made a pretty terrible first impression having snickered at her name back at the bunks. I pushed forward anyway. Okay, I'm glad most of us are on the same page here. Training should have already started. The dais is empty. We are on the edge of having a late start. You all know that damn well does not happen. Ever. Not with the GC in general, and definitely not here at Prime. I'm not seeing any overt threats or anything coming our way. Does anyone else? 2 heads shaking no, and 1 calm face with stone eyes. All right then, let's sit on the edge of our seats and be ready to roll with whatever they inevitably throw at us. As long as we try to jail, we'll be able to dominate this. That's what they want after all. You see, what they're gonna do. My words were cut off with the loud chink of metal on metal. Massive blast doors slid down over the expansive entrance to the hall, and what few windows in the room were sealed by some sort of metal sheeting. My heart began to pound. This was a bad start. They didn't want us to get out. An alarm began to sound. Rather than panic or chaos breaking out as it would if this were to happen in a regular place on a regular day, crisp silence among the trainees hit immediately. No one said a word. Now everyone was on the same page and waiting, the alarm blaring in the background. But we, from Primrose 33, had already discussed our best course of action, vague as it might have been. So we were a couple steps ahead of the rest of the room when thick gelatinous ooze began spraying down from the rafters. The stuff was thick and viscous, reminding me of the cane syrup my granddad used to make back in Arkansas and that we used to enjoy on our biscuits. That sweet treat was delectable, but it was a pain in the ass to get off plates, and God forbid if you spilled it on anything. Like that deep brown cane, this all but opaque black goop was thicker than thick. Molasses on a cold day is a cliche, but rather than using it for a time metaphor, that's the perfect stand-in for whatever the hell it was they were cascading down upon we newly arrived trainees. The thickness was problem enough. Rather quickly, it became apparent what the real challenge being proffered the entire group was.
This room will be completely full of fluid in 9 minutes, if my eyeballing dimensions is correct.
Flowers stated flatly.
I know that's what you 3 are wondering. I know that's part of my expertise, so there you have it. Let's move.
I shook off the heartbeat of surprise of having Flowers leap back into being a functioning part of the group, and we 4 began to piece together a rapid-fire plan. As that planning began, though, another chest-vibrating plink, plink, plink was felt more than heard over the slathering waterfall of goo, and the torrent doubled in intensity.
Make that 5 minutes,
Flowers said with a slight uptick of her mouth. She seemed to be enjoying this. Plink, plink, plink. The flow increased again. 5 minutes to 2.5. Plink, plink, plink. The flow increased again. 2.5 to a little over 60 seconds. Plink, plink, plink. we four each took a lungful of air and prepared to fight for our lives, together, as a unit, for the very first time. Part 3. Circumjacent. The trial by ordeal, as it came to be called by all of those involved that day, was a full 6 months behind us now. But, at least once a week, Primrose 33 cracked a joke or shared a reminiscence about the day, not that there was much cause for jocularity while the little test was being applied to all of us. It turned out that this type of high-risk initial testing was somewhat of a rarity at other global Confederation academies. However, the entire planet was well aware that Dublin's Academy Prime was far from your average GC academy. As we were the lucky ones allowed to attend the world's proving ground for leaders in the coming battle for our planet against the Smock, I guess these increased stakes were a bit understandable. Barbara, Anton, and Hai all agreed with me, once we'd survived the brush with death. I could not help but laugh every time I thought of this, because that phrase alone denoted two of the major changes that came from the ordeal. First, I had been within kissing distance of dying. As the viscous ooze had covered our mouths and noses, we of Primrose 33 had worked together to get up to the large tempered windows of the factory floor. Anton and I worked together to take a heavy stanchion up as we swam through the thick, killing quasi-liquid. Barb and Hai made their way to the window first, looking for weaknesses in the glass and surrounding masonry. Between the four of us, it only took us about 2 minutes to swim up to the window and break it, holding fast against some sconces near that window, knowing that we'd be swept out of the window and dashed against the sidewalks outside if we did not. The halls were filled with gasps, retching, and calls for medics, followed by the echo of cheers upon cheers upon cheers. In 120 seconds, we had become the heroes of our class of peers at Prime and the talk of the Academy. Apparently, this particular test had been used before, though. In the wake of our little pods doing so well and acting so quickly, it was disclosed to us that the commanders used this test to see which grouping would be the leading grouping for that class. The leaders of leaders, if you will. Needless to say, we were surprised. We were elated. We were a bit numb from all the increased attention, from simply working together to keep ourselves and the rest of the room breathing. The second major change? I metamorphosed into Mac, my preferred nickname to Rob, Bob, Bobby, or any other play on Robert. McCarthy became Barb. Fitzgerald phased into Anton. Flowers shifted into her preferred Hai. Brushes with the end of our lives, shared with 3 others, seemed to get us all past formalities and our initial standoffishness. All of this bonding and fanfare was touching and all, but the ever-present weight of the Smock coming in just 30 months soured these mouthfuls of sweetness. The shift in our group dynamic was life-altering and, in hindsight, utterly necessary. Trust in one's crewmates is what makes a good team great and soon-to-be dead team into a crew that might just survive amid the chaos and unknowns. In the wake of our newfound renown, we were granted special access to the Beldam, an all but ancient virtual flight simulator that could once accommodate up to 16 people, but was now recalibrated for quads and quads alone. Even the groups of 8 were made to split in half and do their training together on a rotating basis, ensuring that all members of the team trained with the others. This allowance was a major accolade. Only the best of the best of the best of the best were allowed to enter. Our inclusion in that number was enough to allow us to have the word elite whispered about us while we were in our classes, out in other forms of training and in the residence halls. Because modern equipment had to amend the Beldame's original innards in order to bring her up to modern specifications and needs, what used to be an extensive open area for 4 quads to move and train amid a simulated bridge environment had evolved into a state-of-the-art simulator more akin to one of our small strike ships that most of us would be manning. Yes, but it had also become a cramped space where even the quarter of the volume of the old days made those crammed within quite uncomfortable. The Beldam did have air conditioning, thankfully. That made the extremely tight quarters just a touch more bearable. Most that were spending a great deal of time in the Beldam referred to the poor girl as the Magdalene, instead of, as many called it, her already less than awe-inspiring name. It was in these new accelerated training sessions that the bond from the team's actions during the ordeal became apparent to all the instructors monitoring and to us ourselves. Even the best of the best got snippy with one another when a stray elbow caught a rib or when a quick turn resulted into a body check. But not us. In those tight quarters, we gelled as if we'd been doing this our entire lives. We'd trained for our various roles, certainly, but that training was not extensive enough to explain the kind of interplay we had. Anton kept us nimble at the flight controls in the front of the Beldam. Barb took on the helm's weaponry at the standing station in the back of the room, being non-standards trained and all. That was a group decision. We decided if there were anything we wanted to be when the Smock showed, it was non-standard. High was at the seated tactical station to my right, we two being in what small amount of open space in the middle of the simulated flight deck served as the command station. As fitted her Omega designation, she did almost everything else, though that everything was really mostly limited to diagnostics and assisting with command. And indeed, that left command for me. I know that sounds like it must have hurt our gelling, but on the contrary, we all had voted whether I should continue in my role that I'd been being groomed for and had tested into. Apparently, we'd only been the second quad to democratically select our placement, flying in the face of military tradition and, technically, our standing orders. The only other quad that had done this was the Commandant's herself. One can understand why this was accepted, despite what could have come off as a rebellious tinge. It was also in these new accelerated training sessions that something beyond the bond from the team's actions during the ordeal began to manifest itself quite by accident. During one of the more rigorous training sessions where we were flying against shuttle patterns from the dated Russo-American War, I sat back in the command station chair after we'd come out the other end of a particularly fierce dogfight where we'd faced down a 5-on-1 scenario with relative ease. And, upon my relaxing, I spread my arms over my armrests like any normal person might have. My arm went to rest on the armrest amid the cheers and proud exhales, my hand lazily drifting over just a bit. There. That was when it happened. My hand didn't just brush High's. We all but interlocked fingers right then. In the moment of joy and pride, our clumsy hand clasping seemed right. So we pushed our fingers into the other's in-between places, and I vigorously rubbed the upper area of her hand. It took a couple of moments for us to look over at one another, grinning like children. Then, we realized what it was we were doing. She blushed. I goggled. We both blushed furiously some more and took our hands from one another, smiles faltering as we did so. My heart beat until it pained me, and I looked to Anton and Barb. He was up front guiding us into our virtual safe harbor. Her back was to us. She was recalibrating weapons, as was her job. They had not seen us. I had not compromised our bond. I had not made them uncomfortable. But I had let High down. I took a sickly breath and turned to my right again. Our eyes snagged. I tried to apologize with mine. She seemed to be doing the same. She opened her mouth to say something, but it was drowned out by the sound of orbital mortars. The beldam shook. Our main lighting went off. Our emergency lights came on. Primrose 33 launched ourselves back into action, re-engaging that preternatural synchronicity. Still, it was too late. The simulation screen went from flashing red to black. No, not black, just off. In the world of the beldam, that meant death. We had died.
PR33, Mark 785, deceased at 1734, Mark 391-3994, McCarthy, Fitzgerald, Flowers, under command of McAllister, exit simulator.
The steely mechanized voice stated the obvious. We exited. First Barb, then Anton, then High, then me. The commander should always be last to leave the ship. Some of the other quads in the room looked aghast. Others looked disappointed. Others looked angry. The mechanized voice came back as we were almost at the outer exit door.
McAllister, Robert, report to the Commandant's office.
My three crewmates gave me a look of sad horror, the whites of their eyes showing with the knowledge that we might have flown the beldam for the final time, that we might have just ended our upward trajectory toward really making a difference in the fight against the Smock. We parted ways, them going right where I was meant to go left. The honeycombed hallways of white and beige and official insignias became a blur as I made my way to face the Commandant. I stopped in the antechamber, staring straight ahead, still a bit shell-shocked from the events in the simulator. Not the death, mind you. The charged accidental exchange with Hyacinth. The secretary must have ushered me in. I simply heard her speak, so I moved forward toward the enormous oaken door. Upon entry, I noted the enormity of the room was in stark contrast with its Spartan decoration. That thought came, but the details were blurred around the edges, and I could not hang on to the moment. I just called Flowers High. Miss Omega herself Hyacinth. That was a first. That was an oddity. In my mind, I tried to make sense of it. Mr. McAllister, thank you for coming. Let's talk about what it means to be a leader, shall we? Let's talk about what it means that you openly showed affection to an officer under your command. With that, the Commandant's door closed. Part 4. The Fallout. In the end, we had not had our access to the beldam rescinded. For one, the scenario where we died has only been conquered once, and that was by the Commandant's quad. Additionally, it is meant to be a no-win scenario. It goes until the crew dies, no matter what. Our failure? My failure? Had been expected. Hell, it had been programmed so that we could know what such a situation might look like. As for the Commandant's talk with me, well, that was a different matter entirely. To say that she was livid isn't quite right. She was angry, to be sure. But it was an anger tempered by disappointment and a very real desire to help a colleague. In fact, that's what she had called me. Her colleague. That alone was a great compliment. I'd actually flinched when she'd said it. After some calming me and explaining that the Global Confederation was a military organization of sorts, she underscored that we as an organization had not swallowed all of their practices across the board. She herself hated the, albeit mostly necessary, strict pecking order. The GC had drafted all ages, all walks of life. We were desperate. This meant that it had to be a bit more relaxed with such things. Wives and husbands had joined together, brothers and sisters, grandparents and grandchildren, ex-husbands and ex-wives. All walks of life. The Commandant had called me in to warn me of the type of affection she'd seen me show high in a moment of weakness, in a moment of stress, in a moment of exultation. That is what she called our touch, though, our exchange, a moment of weakness. She said that she was only looking out for me, looking out for our quad. She pointed out that I might have caught the next round of attack in the Beldam had I not been caressing High's hand, which was, of course, true enough. The Commandant and I parted on good terms, maybe even familiar, relaxed, friendly terms, unless I was missing all my cues. Though strange at first, the more the Commandant explained the not quite so militaristic attitudes of the highest echelons of the GC, the more her attitudes toward me made sense. She was a colleague pushing me to be the best I could be, so Earth had the best chance at survival it possibly could. When I got back to Primrose 33, I entered to 3 concerned faces that had clearly been sitting for quite some time awaiting my return. Saucers bedecked with teacups stood testament to just how concerned they were. In the months following the Smock's contact and the GCs being formed, the Confederation had tried to demonstrate leadership by implementing a rationing system. Tea, biscuits, cream, sugar. In the GC, and its academies at least, these were rare commodities and not to be partaken in lightly. My quad was stressed. Rather than take a cup myself, I gave them a brief, thoroughly redacted version of my conversation with the Commandant. I let them know that we were all fine, and that the exercise was built to be unwinnable. I did not let them know that the Commandant warned me to beware falling for High and allowing that to become a distraction for me. The entire time I recounted the conversation, though, High's stare was unbroken. Barb and Anton both looked around, naturally breaking eye contact and hopping between normal cues that are the unspoken rules of any conversation that I'd ever been a part of. Hyacinth would not unlock. She knew the reason for the protracted conversation with the Commandant and was burning to know the uncensored truth. The repetition of the partial conversation only took about half an hour. Then, we split for our afternoon regimen, just like any other afternoon. This particular afternoon saw we of Primrose 33 off for the late afternoon and remainder of the evening, which was not a rarity, but something to be enjoyed. Anton always went to the horse races, a welcomed distraction from the doom and gloom of training day in and day out for the potential end to your species and planet. Barb spent most of her time in the combat arenas. Despite being one of the most skilled grapplers and hand-to-hand fighters anyone at Academy Prime had ever seen, she just refused to go a day without honing those already intimidatingly sharp skills. Good on her. That would serve the quad and the Earth well when the time came. On any other afternoon, High would go study the newest theorems regarding the budding anti-grav weaponry field, or hypotheses involving the Smock and where and what specifically they were. On any other afternoon, I would call home and talk to my mama, letting her know that I love and miss her. This afternoon was not the usual. Once Barb and Anton had said farewell and headed out, each within 10 minutes of the other, High all but cornered me in the living area of our quad. She did not say anything. She did not have to. With that pregnant silence and that heavy emerald stare, I knew exactly what was expected. I spilled the rest of what the Commandant had told me. How she and I had killed the four of us because of our impetuousness and our immaturity. Our moment of weakness. How the relationship was not forbidden by the GC, but that it was a terrible idea on any account from every commander of every ship to have trained throughout the entirety of the GC. They all agreed this was bad. How, in spite of my feelings for her, I could not see us moving forward. In spite of my love for her, we couldn't make this happen. As a commander of our quad, I could not and would not put us all at risk to exercise my always resurgent romantic side. She did not show any emotion. There was no response. I sidestepped her, grabbed the used teacups and saucers, and headed to the mess to clean up. I couldn't help but balk at myself a bit. Here I was, leading one of the premier crews in the Global Confederation, arguably one of the best hopes for the Earth against an alien threat, and I was washing the tea time china in order to escape a woman half my size because I like her. Even as a 16-year-old, I had more courage and sense than this. I quickly became lost in the task at hand, so it's no surprise that I lurched in surprise when I felt hands creep around me from behind, locking just below my navel. A teacup smashed against the floor. I cursed and slowly turned, not breaking the embrace. It was High, of course. She beamed up at me and pointed out to me that during my recounting of the Commandant's conversation with me, I'd mentioned not being able to be together despite my loving her. She giggled when she said this. Flowers did not giggle. She was right, though. I didn't remember saying that I loved her out loud. In all honesty, I can't recall what all she said to me in that moment, but she was right and she started spilling. I know that she admitted to hating me upon our first meeting. I know she told me she didn't know how that fire had turned into passion so quickly and unexpectedly, but that it almost immediately had. I know that she called me gra, one of the few Irish words I had learned in my time at Prime, the word for love or lover or something. I know that she reached up and touched my face so tenderly that the feeling brought tears to my eyes. I know that she leaned up toward me, softly kissing my neck and my jawline in an act that should have been awkward or strange, but it was not. It was authentic, real. In fact, it was the most authentic exchange I think I've ever had with another human being. At some point or another, she'd stopped speaking altogether and simply continued petting and kissing me. She pulled back eventually, releasing the embrace and taking my hands and lacing our fingers together.
I defy anyone who tries to keep me from you, Robert.
She was the only one to ever call me Robert, just as I was the only one to ever call her Hyacinth.
We have found love in the most hopeless place imaginable, and if that's not what we are fighting for, I do not know why we are here.
Then, we kissed. We cried. We held one another. Hell, Somewhere in that morass of affection and emotion, we even finished the dishes and cleaned up the shattered teacup. It was 20:45 when Barb came back to the quad. 2200 when Anton came ambling in. By 22:30, we had announced to the other half of Primrose 33 the rest of the story regarding the Commandant and the full extent of the feelings we had for one another. We had to be honest with the people with whom we would be fighting and risking our lives. By 22:45, we'd answered some difficult questions from Barb and from Anton. By 23:10, Barb and Anton had announced that they had also been having amorous exchanges since roughly 40 days into training, that they thought our failure in the Beldam was their fault because they were doing something similar. By 23:30, we had popped open a bottle of whiskey that Anton had been squirreling away for a special occasion. And that is how we carried on for the next few weeks. In absolute defiance of tradition and general practice, we trained to fight all day, and we essentially double dated throughout the evenings. As Hyacinth had pointed out to me, this was being human. This is why we were pushing so hard to be prepared for the Smock. The act of being in love, in and of itself, was the best thing we could all do to spit in the face of these alien bastards that dared threaten our home. Like the Commandant said, though, far too often, love does blind eyes to that which they might normally see. Part 5. The Smock. When the alarms went off at 0300, we all leapt into action. At this point in our training, we were used to these little surprise drills that were arranged to keep us on our toes and ready for action. We still had 5 months until the threatened invasion, but keeping keen on our skills was, of course, extremely important. Primrose 33 was dressed and moving toward the training bay in less than 4 minutes. We sprinted around the corner to find the bay locked. We tried the doors just to be sure. They were locked. Something was wrong. Anton held up a finger as we began to chat in hushed voices, wondering why we were the only ones there and why the doors were still sealed. Shh! Listen up. Do you hear that, mates? He asked. The distant thuds sounded like the fireworks they used to put on down by the riverside back home. We always did our own smaller family light show, but we could always still hear the larger town show off in the distance. The thick July air dampening the explosions somewhat, but never fully muffling them. We were in the heart of Prime. If we were really hearing explosions, that meant Dublin must be.
Dear God, it's an attack. They've come early,
Barb all but whispered. "All right, crew. We always knew this might be a possibility," I said. "Now, we've trained for this, maybe not to the extent that we'd have liked, but we have always known that was going to be the case no matter when the Smock showed up. Let's saddle up, roll out, and save the fucking world, eh?" Quiet mumbles of agreement came to me, and we set out running to the real ship bay. En route, we ran into several more crews that had, by this point, also put 2 and 2 together and were headed toward the ship bay as we were. As we made our way through Prime's halls, I cursed my idiocy. Of course, these would-be conquerors wouldn't tell us the actual date for the beginning of the invasion. Clearly, I had read far too many romanticized stories of ancient Rome and the virtues of war and wanting to fight on equal terms. War is hell. That's what more modern minds have asserted. I had allowed myself to be lulled to sleep as if my brain were suffering from early caducity. We were about 16 when we made it to the pre-flight deck. 3 other quads had joined Primrose 33 as we jogged to the fight. We all burst into the pre-flight and began zipping our flight suits on over our regular daily gear, our varying colors disappearing behind inky blacks and highlighted by slate grays. Some other captain of one of the other 3 quads was done first, and she hit the switch for the blast door to open the flight deck, screaming above all the alarms and general din, "Oak Grove 17 to me!" Her words were cut off. She and one other member of her crew that had already begun to heed her call even before she fully voiced it were consumed by a ball of flames spurting out. The other 14 of us leapt back for the sides of the room, crashing into walls and one another, but avoiding the flames that pushed in and licked the middle of the room. Some brave soul clamped down on the button, shuttering the blast door. It was Anton. God bless Anton. We were unprepared. From the beginning, we had known that our degree of preparation would never quite be enough. There was only so much the Earth could do on such a small time limit, and with such a ragtag group of volunteers meant to be the saviors of this world. Now, with Academy Prime's entire fleet aflame, I began to realize just how much hubris we'd been displaying these last few months. Everyone looked wide-eyed at one another, blinking, breathing heavily. I realized I had to speak up. "Everyone, listen up. We have got to get into the city proper. The Smock will be hitting central Dublin hardest, if for no other reason than the symbolic value of decimating the symbolic capital of the global confederation. I say we grab what weapons we can find and go give them the fight of their lives as guerrilla fighters on the ground. How about it? Let's do some killing." Cheers bounced off the blackened walls. The different quads bumped fists, shook hands, and ran in different directions. The different crews sprinted apart, the lights and sounds of Prime's alarm systems playing off the smoke, turning the halls into a grim dance party. It wasn't 10 minutes until we found ourselves pounding the pavement towards central Dublin. We all had our sidearms, so that was somewhat comforting, but we did not find the massive assault-style weapons we'd hoped to find on our way out of the now alight Prime. On the way out, we came to understand that we were nowhere near the weapons depot, and there would be no weapons to simply snag from emergency preparedness lockers. So, Anton grabbed a fire axe. Barb took up one of the supposedly decorative spears. I found a discarded hand blaster that had just a bit more juice than our sidearms. I did not pick up a second weapon. I knew we would come across weapons in the field. Some discarded from fear, some discarded amid the throes of death. I didn't hold my companion's need for a second weapon against him. I understood. Prime was burning. Dublin was burning. Earth was burning. As soon as we were a mile or two into our jog, we began to see the destruction. The Smock had leveled entire sections of Dublin, and the assault continued. The near hour it takes to walk Dublin shrunk and went by quicker than I could have imagined on the morning runs we used to do for PT. This run was a blur. The only feature of the landscape I happened to notice was the abundance of churchyards, their Celtic knots and crosses rising up austere and beautiful. God's acres, several of them. They will burn too, when the Smock's destructive gaze turns back outward from the city again. Thoughts of God abandoning us leap up in my mind, but I push them down and keep pushing forward. The moment we hit Dublin proper, we knew we had already lost the city. And with Prime and the GC's de facto headquarters there, that meant that the rest of the planet's defense centers didn't stand a chance. The quad made its way from ruined street corner to overturned dumpster to massive rubble pile, staying hidden from the worrying ships that were flying so damn low, so damn quietly, so damn fast. Seeing the way these smaller fighter aircraft move, I knew that this war was a foregone conclusion. Barb, Anton, and High's eyes let me know that they all had come to the same realization. As expected, we picked up some discarded shipbuster rifles and ionic grenades off the charred bodies of what we assumed were fallen comrades from the GC's fighting force. As we closed in on the Liffey, we heard the sounds of battle. Men and women crying, Smock ships whisper whirring by, and pulsing guns making a chumph, chumph noise. Both far too quiet for the devastation they were raining down on the city. Those sounds were eerie. "All right, crew," I said with as much courage and resolve as I could muster. "This is what we've trained for. It's looking bad, but I'm going in. I won't hold it against you if you don't want to come. This looks like it might just be a done deal." Steel, angry eyes from Anton. Backhand slap to my chest from Barb, accompanied by an eye roll. Nearly imperceptible shaking of her head from High. Disappointment coming at me. The quad would go together then. We put our scavenged weapons into active mode, nodded at one another one time, and we ran toward the flames and the screams and the whisper whirring and the chunkf chunkf. We quickly found a flipped and burnt-out bus to use as cover. 15 collective shots in, and we had taken down 4 of those bastard ships. We did not acknowledge it to one another. We did not celebrate. We just kept firing. I wanted to see what these things looked like. I'm betting High wanted to see them even more than I did. She'd religiously studied their biology for months now, all in hopes that we might find something in that biology to down them. Sure, biological weapons was a dirty term on Earth when discussing human-on-human warfare, but with our species facing enslavement, if not full extinction, all was fair. But we had no such luck. The little bubble pods on top of the all but nondescript ovular ships were tinted. All we saw was deep gray bordering on black shaded glass. If hopes and dreams were, well, I could not think of that old adage my mother used to say. That scared me more than these aliens did. God, I wonder if she is in the city today. Maybe if she was out at the house, she'll have a chance to run and hide. God, please be with her. Only 20 minutes in, our larger weapons charges were beginning to fizzle, but we'd taken down at least 12 fighters, if not 15. My counting started to be off a bit. Not bad for 4 regular Janes and Joes with a drip of training. Impressive? Yes. But it got us noticed. We began taking heavy fire. The maelstrom was raining down on us now. Pieces of the gutted bus chipped away. We were pinned down. But at least that meant some of the other fighters had a bit of a respite from the hellfire. Maybe they could reload. Maybe they could get away to fight again after some licking of wounds and rearming. Maybe... A scream. I turned to my left. The last barrage from the Smock had made the entire city block shudder, and it had also hit our cover. A 2-foot piece of jagged bus frame was lodged through the abdomen of Barb. Anton echoed her scream. How long had they loved each other? Just because I was dumb enough not to see it didn't mean it hadn't been going on for some time. My God, what was happening around us? Anton looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot with rage and sickening sorrow. Mac, get the fuck out of here. Barb, she and I have some alien fuckers to kill. You and High retreat. Rally the troops. With your planning and her smarts, you two can wipe them the fuck out yet. Anton, we aren't gonna leave you two. You know that. Mac. Leave. This is what we want now. This is what we want, right, Barb? With Anton's words came a nod and a weak smile from the expert fighting woman. Man. Barb was grinning even as she bled out with a piece of bus skeleton through her middle. What could we do? High and I didn't give them hugs or handshakes. We did not say goodbye. We simply gave them a nod and left to Anton propping Barb up and preparing for the next flyby from the Smock. High and I heard the two screaming in Irish together as they fired away. An explosion cut those voices off. They did not start again. High and I ran in a strange, focused yet blurred sprint through the streets of Dublin. We'd been on the north side of the Liffey, it would seem. I only knew this because we crossed one of the many bridges that were now charred and unrecognizable and had ended up in the bustling Temple Bar. I choked a laugh and pointed out the surroundings to High. Any other time of day, this place would be thick with tourists and local drinkers and workers alike. Today, the streets were aflame and in disarray. The place was barely discernible as the place I'd come to enjoy on a few of my nights off from Prime from time to time. High did not seem as amused. She pulled me off the main street toward a pub we'd gone to a couple times with Barb and Anton. Once inside, I finally felt it was safe enough to take a moment to breathe and sit down and talk about our next move. Hi, darling. What's the plan? We both know you're smarter than me. Rank and duty assignment be damned. What's our next move?
We enjoy each other here at the end of our city, Mac.
She said in her soft, loving voice that was generally only reserved for me during private moments far from prying eyes and reaching ears. All I could do was blink at her, dumbfounded. She wanted to give up? That's not the High I knew. Because High was smarter than me, she could see the confusion in my eyes. She unzipped part of the top of her black flight suit and pulled up her uniform that was under it, showing me a piece of rebar lodged just above her left hip. The black of the flight suit had hidden it from me, but her clothes were saturated with blood. The fool I was, I thought it was sweat. She was as good as dead. I had no med kit. She had run with me as if nothing were wrong, spurting blood along the way. She had fought alongside her quad with dignity and bravery. She had been the greatest warrior a person could ever hope to be in the face of inevitable loss and death. Still, she was as good as dead. I went to speak. Hi, I can't. I was going to say that I could not go on without her, but my voice broke. For the first time in a very long time, I started to cry. She held me. She held me as she sat bleeding out on a dirty floor of a pub that once had held such life. She pet me and hushed my crying. Shh, shh, my gra.
We are together. That's all that matters. We love one another. That is all that matters.
After a few moments of sobbing and High's comforting, I calmed my breathing and looked back up at the love of my life. I thought back to my first impressions of her. Last, I was greeted by a pale green goddess of a woman. Her sea green eyes framed by velvety curls of brown. Her body was toned and tight, but not in the sleek, harsh way of Barbara's and not in the bulky, corded way of Anton's. She smiled widely but wasn't quick to meet my gaze. She was shy then. Hyacinth Rose Flowers, engineer, master electrician, astrophysicist, and communications liaison, among many other things. That she was gorgeous was enough to take me aback. That she'd apparently qualified in every testing subject, save hand-to-hand combat, was an added bit to knock me on my heels. And that name of hers? Wow. Hyacinth Rose Flowers. I snickered a bit, which brought her tucked chin up and her eyes shot up to meet mine and our handshake intensified. Hyacinth High Rose Flowers, 24. Trained at Boston Unit 27C. Ranked Omega, the highest of the high. Assigned to Primrose 33.
My love.
Ranked an expert at everything. Oh, the life we would have led had we had the chance.
You look so deep in thought, Robert. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me stories. Make this special.
She purred, showing no weakness in her voice, though I knew her strength must have almost fully drained out of her by now. So I did. The city roared as it fell outside, but here, with her, I kept my voice serene and warm. I told her that I'd been thinking of our first meeting. That elicited a painful giggle and an admonishment for making her laugh. I went on, relating our past to her, the soft smile never faltering from her lips, her eyes staying alert. I moved on to the future I wanted to have with her. I wanted her to meet my mother. I wanted to marry her in a massive wedding with far too many guests, something that I said I'd never take part in. Yet that's what came to me now that the possibility was becoming an impossibility there on the pub floor. The wedding would be draped in dark silver and thick honeyed gold. Those were her dream colors. She smiled even more, even deeper, realizing that I'd been listening when she'd said as much. Her eyes were droopy now. They were anything but alert. I wanted to be the father of her children. We had to have at least 2. I'd always thought only children were weird ones. We also had to have at least 1 son. I had to pass on my middle name to my firstborn son. That was a McAllister tradition. I wanted her to be the primary breadwinner. She had such talent, such intelligence. She would undoubtedly be the one to find bigger, better jobs that could change the world. Plus, she needed intellectual stimulation like most people needed air, even more so than me. Without it, she couldn't be happy. I'd stay home with the kids when they were little. Then, we'd get me back into work after. I wanted her. I wanted to see what she would accomplish. I wanted to grow old with her. The both of us seeing the pains and kinks of our bodies multiplying, but still adoring one another for who and what we were. I wanted her. I wanted her. I only wanted her. I only want you, Hyacinth Rose Flowers. In response, she breathed out, I love you. Then her chest failed to rise. My tears came back again, hot and heavy. My body thrummed with pain, both from the battle back north of the river and with the pain of losing her. I was right. This, she and I, that's the whole point of fighting these invaders. Without this, humanity just isn't. I continued to hold her as night began to creep through the streets of Dublin. The sound of genocide never ceased. My flight suit had become mourning sables, appropriate for this end to my life in all its facets. My anxiety and fear were non-existent. Being dead already seemed a superpower. When the dark was pitch, and the only light came from sentry ships hovering through the streets and occasionally firing on a wayward man or woman who had been bravely scouring the streets for whatever odd reasons took them out of their hidden places of refuge, I lied Hyacinth down on the floor. I collected chunks of rubble in and around the pub, and I formed the best grave and memorial I could in the circumstances. I knew I would be back, so the temporary measure was enough for now. I knew I would be back because I would not die anywhere but by her side. I needed to be with her. I did not lie to her when I told her that she was all I wanted. When she was encased in concrete and splintered wood and detritus, I knelt down at the foot of her makeshift grave and prayed for her. And I prayed for my mama. And I prayed that God would give me the strength to find what I need to bury my love properly and kill a few more of these vile beasts before my time came. I only want you, Hyacinth Rose Flowers, I repeated to her. I only want you. I was right. These relationships, this love between people is the point of fighting. Without this, humanity is not human. What does that make me now? I don't know. Maybe I'm a monster. And maybe a monster can fight monsters better than we poor humans could. Maybe these Smock's partial success created their potential downfall. I had taken a scrap of High's uniform that I tied into a necklace and put under my black flight suit. I touched it once, rose from her grave, and walked into the Dublin night, leaving my humanity there, buried with her. thank you all for listening to the 5-part novella Sonbol, an original set of stories in the form of a novella by me, Jared I. McGee. Also, a huge thank you to all of the artists and the web collectives for making their works available for artists like me to further lift up our own work. In the show notes, there are extensive links and licenses and shout-outs to the many musicians and sound effects artists who have put their work up for free use via attribution licenses, universal public domain dedication licenses, and so much more. The collectives that I used were freesound.org, Free Music Archive, and YouTube's Free Music Library. Some of the artists featured here are Gelsonic from the Free Music Archive. All of Gelsonic's works are being used under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 international licenses. Gelsonic's works were featured in Part 1 of The Breach. In Part 2, Persenche, Drakenson from freesound.org was used for some soundscaping, and that is being used under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial 3.0 attribution license. The final track from Part 2 came from user I Speak Waves and is being used under a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 unported license. Parts 3 and 4 feature all tracks being used under CC 0 1.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. And in the final part, Part 5, Lee Rosevere's album 5 Minute Meditations is being used, specifically the track 5 Minute Meditations album mixed with alpha waves. This is being used under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial 4.0 International license. Several more tracks and sound effects were used under public domain dedication licenses, and several are of my own creation, all mixed and matched. Again, if you'd like to see the full list of credits, please look at the show notes. And well, as far as I can see, that wraps up the adventures of Primrose 33. At least for now. I truly hope that you enjoyed getting to know Anton, Barb, Hi, and Mac. This also marks the very first time, as I said before, that I've tried my hand at producing a full-length novella in one take. A big step for pros, to be sure. All that being said, we will be back together in 2 weeks' time to leap back into the world of stories. Until then, love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is always, stranger than fiction. Thank you so much for supporting me in this fun, new endeavor, and thank you for listening.